I'm Mike with Elite Investigations here in Billings, Montana. And this is Behind the Investigation. I'm glad you're joining me today. You know, every investigator has a case that stays with them, a face, a name, a question that never fades. And for me, that case is Gary Ray Hose. He was just 6 years old when he vanished, nearly 50 years ago. No trace, no answers, just his grieving brothers and decades of silence. This episode is part one of a special two-part series because this case runs so deep and what we uncover changes everything. Today, we dig into a story that stretches from abuse and heartbreak to bulldozers and cadaver dogs to a remote patch of desert in Arizona where the truth may lie hidden beneath the sand. As we peel back the layers, we'll uncover more about Gary, his family, and the secrets they left behind. We'll try to shine a light on what really happened to this little boy who disappeared so long ago. So, grab a cup of coffee or your favorite drink, and let's begin today's episode of Behind the Investigation. Gary Ray Hose disappeared in 1974. He was just 6 years old. He had a twin brother named Jerry and an older brother named Guy. They grew up in a modest home in North Phoenix, Arizona. To the outside world, it looked just like another normal family. But inside those walls was a different story. According to both brothers, their home life was a nightmare. Years of violence and abuse at the hands of their mother, and silence from their father. She was a very evil woman, and for some reason, she took most of her anger out on little Gary. They say he suffered the worst. Imagine being a twin, born side by side, growing up with someone who shares your face, your voice, your memories. And now, imagine waking up one day and they're just gone. No goodbyes, no answers, no justice. That's what happened to Jerry Hose. When he woke up one morning, Gary was gone. This mystery started one day when Gary, for the third or fourth time, tried to escape from the abuse. He ran away, desperate to get out. Imagine how bad it must have been for a 6-year-old to risk everything just to get away. But police, of course, found him, and they brought him right back to his evil mother. His brother Guy remembers seeing him bruised and scared. And the last time Jerry and Guy saw their brother, he was being dragged into their parents' bedroom. They could hear screams, they could hear him being beaten, and then after a while, silence. Nothing. No missing person report, no Amber Alert, no public plea for help. Gary just disappeared. And the people who should have cared about the most said the least. Jerry and Guy were told never to speak Gary's name again. But 20 years later, after Gary vanished, Jerry went public. In 1994, he appeared on a show called The Crusaders. They brought in a private investigator and confronted the father on national television. Jerry looked him in the eye and said, "I want to know what happened to my twin brother." And the father said nothing. So they went and confronted the mother. What'd she do? She said, "It's my private business," and she slammed the door shut on him. Let that sink in for a second. A child goes missing, and decades later, that's the response she gives? Well, the case went cold after a while, and another 20 years had passed, and then I got the call. The older brother Guy wanted answers. He wanted closure, justice. He hired me to pick up the pieces. This case wasn't going to be easy, but I agreed to take it on. It's been 40 years already, 20 since the last detective worked on it. And the family had moved so many times across several states. And Guy didn't even know where to find Jerry now at this point. So I started looking into the family, especially the mother and father. I learned they own a piece of property just outside of Phoenix, about 3 or 5 acres of desert land, no structures on it. But here's what struck me really as odd. They had moved off in over 40 years and sold every home except that one. Every time someone started asking questions about Gary, the family would pack up and move. That pattern didn't help Gary. It helped to hide what happened to him, though. Over the years, they told conflicting stories. Gary had been given to a family member, or that he was placed in a boys' home in Texas. Well, I checked those leads, and there was no records, there was no trace, there was no truth. Still, they kept paying the taxes on that desert property. Even as they moved across Arizona, Idaho, and Oregon, they held on to that one piece of property. Even when money was tight and bills stacked up, we later learned that they made a pact between themselves, never to sell that property while one of them was alive. That's what we call a red flag, people. Guy remembers that property. They moved there just days after Gary went missing. They left the house where Gary likely died and relocated to that exact land. In the old house, Guy says they kept the box in the master bedroom, and it was a locked wooden chest. And they called it the punishment box. And the mother would put one of the twins in there whenever she was mad at them. And that night Gary went missing, that's where he was dragged into that bedroom with the door closed. And Guy could hear the screaming from the other side of the door, the crying, and then silence. The next morning, they were told by his mother never to speak Gary's name again. He was just gone. It's my belief that Gary was killed that night and that his father buried him, probably on that desert land south of Phoenix. They moved there to keep watch over the grave and to avoid neighbors asking questions. Later, when the local school started asking questions, they moved again, this time to Idaho. It was in Idaho, though, where Jerry, now 12, showed up to school one day, bruised from head to toe, and the mother was finally arrested. Jerry was taken from the family by the state and adopted out to another family. But for some reason, the state left Guy behind to fend for himself with his father. I eventually was able to track down Jerry and reunite him with Guy. This wasn't the first report of abuse. Back in Arizona, before Gary went missing, family services had been involved. They had written a report, and in that report it says, and I quote, "The mother is sadistic We highly suggest parenting classes, end quote. That was it. Parenting classes. Clearly, a different time back in 1970s, but still, I think we all agree Gary deserved better. Well, later, the father finally passed away of cancer. But before he died, my client believed he had possibly written a book, maybe even confessed in the book. Working with my client, we were able to locate the mother. She had just been moved into a nursing home in Oregon, still alive and still silent. We also located her home in Oregon, and inside that home was a large locked safe that I believe if there was a book, it would probably be locked inside that safe. At this point, I felt I had enough information to contact the Maricopa County Cold Case Unit and get them to reopen the case. They agreed and reopened the cold missing person case that Jerry had filed back 20 years ago. Inside those old files were medical records showing broken bones on both of the twin boys. Attempts back then from the investigators to talk to the mother and father were stonewalled by lawyers. But now it's been another 20 years. So I asked them to send detectives to Oregon to interview the mother. And meanwhile, while they were in Oregon, I went back to the original North Phoenix home, the one Gary vanished from. I brought in 3 nationally certified cadaver dogs. These dogs specialize in smelling out and finding bodies buried and possibly buried over decades. The property was searched top to bottom, inside and out. We even brought in a psychic. And later, the sheriff's office returned with ground penetrating radar, but sadly, still nothing. Then we caught a little bit of a break. I found someone new, someone who hadn't spoken publicly before, a babysitter. When she was just a teen girl, she babysat those boys. And she remembers that the mother would tell her not to feed them or give them water. But when the mother would leave, she would sneak them food and drink. She could see bruises on them and the pain in their eyes. It shook her so bad that she would go home crying, and she would tell her mother what she had seen. And her mother called the police a couple different times. But again, nothing happened. This is just the beginning of this case. The search for Gary Hose continues, and we won't stop until we know the truth, because every child deserves to be found, and every family deserves answers. But what happens next changes everything. Buried secrets, new evidence, search warrants, and a large-scale search in the Arizona desert that could finally explain what happened to Gary Hose. But just as we were starting to get close, law enforcement threatens to arrest Guy, my client, for searching for his own brother. But then another law enforcement agency steps in, and everything takes a new turn. That's next week, right here on Behind the Investigation. I want to thank you for watching. Tune in next week for part 2, where we push forward to uncover what we found and come face to face with those still protecting the past. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. And as always, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop asking questions. Until next time.